Hello and welcome to everybody out there in the global world who's listening and observing today. Warm welcome. This is the Circle U Democracy Hub, a European University Alliance, and today we will talk about the elections in Poland for the presidency. And we are located, of course, virtually, but between Berlin and Oslo. But there are more universities in Circle U, and I hope the people listening to us are also coming from more places than Oslo and Berlin. So, a warm welcome to everybody. We do these discussion rounds on elections on a regular basis, and last Sunday has been quite relevant for Europe. So, we had elections in Portugal. We also had presidential elections in Romania, the second round already. And what we will look into the first round of the presidential elections in Poland. All of these elections are quite decisive in terms of policy issues and in terms of the general orientations of the countries. So, therefore, there has been a lot of attention, and which is why I am very happy that we have two experts today who will report to us on various issues related to these elections. And of course, we will have time for many questions from the audience. But let me introduce the panelists first. So on the one side, we have Kaspar Szulecki. He's a researcher at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, and he is also a research professor for international climate governance. And he has done a lot of tremendous work on the relation or the combination of international relations, climate change, environmental politics, and in this respect also on the position of the various Polish governments when it comes to the new Green Deal in Europe, energy transition, and how this has also been used as a political issue for discussion in domestic politics. So we will learn more about how this has also been an issue in the campaign for the presidential elections in Poland. Our other expert today is Elisa Panefeld-Sturksen. She's a student leader in an organization called, or abbreviated, EDA. So it's the European Dialogue and Democracy Association, and they are doing election observation. She has led the work for the elections in 2019 and 23, but of course has also monitored and observed what was going on last Sunday, and therefore she has a lot of insights that she can share with us on the procedures for the elections and generally the work of organizations that do election observations. And I assume you will at the end also tell us a bit more about the next missions that you have for the elections to come. My name is Claudia Mattes. I am the chair for democracy at Humboldt University for Circle U. I am a political scientist and I also do, among others, some work on domestic developments in Poland. And so I was also observing what was going on, and I'm very curious to also listen to the assessments from our two experts. What we have here for you on the screen are the official election results as they were published by the Polish National Electoral Commission. And as you can clearly see, and I think what everybody who read the news in the meantime has learned is that there will be a second round between the two most successful candidates from Sunday, Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki. And of course, we will discuss what you can see in this list about the election results. So therefore, my first question goes to Kasper, and I would like to know from you, what's your take from the results? I think two issues were quite surprising for observers. A, the narrow outcome between the two candidates who will now enter the second round, as this was not really foreseen. So some had expected Trzaskowski to perform a little better and Nawrocki to perform a little worse. And second, the relatively good results of the extreme right-wing nationalist politicians, Sławomir Mencen and Grzegorz Braun. So this was really also something we should take a look at. So what's your stake on the first round of the elections? How would you interpret the results?
Thank you, thank you, Claudia, for this introduction. Um, I think that for those who are actually closely following the polls, the electoral polls before the actual vote, those results are not that surprising. So we've seen that Trzaskowski has been losing support in the polls over the last months, and 32% was something that was given in kind of the last surveys that we've seen before the election. Nawrocki wasn't able to actually gain too much, and some personal issues and scandals related to his well, personal life were not helping in that respect. Certainly, the fact that Mentzen, so the third candidate in the first round, was able to achieve such a good result, which actually reflected the surveys. But if you know the history of elections in Poland, usually this candidate and his political formation usually did better in the polls than in the actual elections, because young people tend to be not so easy to mobilize, and his electorate is primarily young males. This time, actually, they went to the polling stations in their numbers, and that reflects, or the result reflects this. Probably the only surprise, really, is the 1.2 million votes cast for the far fringe right candidate Grzegorz Braun, who represents kind of the right wing of the far right opposition party Konfederacja. And this is something that the polls have not anticipated, probably because there is this effect that people who are asked about their political preferences, when they believe that a certain candidate is beyond the mainstream and kind of subject to some kind of a political taboo, are a bit afraid to actually state their true preferences to the pollsters. So 6.3% for Brown is certainly a surprise. Um, and a lot of commentators have immediately started to treat those results as if they were kind of building blocks, stacking them in a pile, and claiming that Nawrocki is pretty much the winner already, because if you add up all the right-wing votes, the almost 30% that Nawrocki got himself, the almost 15% that Menton got, and the over 6% that Brown got, you should, I mean, you already have a majority. Uh, this doesn't reflect the reality of how electoral politics really works. We have to remember that elections in the president for the presidency are a kind of a special kind of vote where it's very personalized. Um, the support for individual candidates doesn't necessarily reflect the support for political parties that they represent, and it's also not so easy to transfer. So we've already had some additional post-electoral polling where uh, transfers between the candidates were assessed. And this is not such a clear picture, but maybe we can return to that later. All in all, I think the results are certainly troubling for Trzaskowski, because he has to do a lot of work before the second round to be able to win. But at the same time, Nawrocki's camp shouldn't be yet claiming that the victory is theirs, because it's also a long way to go.
Okay, thank you. Now, Elisa, since your organization has done an intensive observation, especially of the previous elections, because there we had seen a lot of difficulties in procedural terms, especially the last presidential election that was held during COVID times, though I don't want to go into the details, but there had been also a lot of legal concerns about the way how the elections had been organized. Also, the media had quite a polarizing effect in the last election. So, how would you comment on the procedures for the recent one, or how would you compare the situation with what your organization had observed in previous years?
Yes, so thank you for this question. So I was leading as you said, the election observation mission that EDA deployed in 2023. And ahead of these elections, there were some changes to the electoral code, and these included, for instance, changing the minimum number of inhabitants per precinct from 500 to 200, and, for instance, organized transport for voters in rural areas. And what we learned during our mission was that many of these changes that happened for the gain of the then incumbent party. And also, I think that we saw a lot be in the 2023 elections, where the effects of the referendum held at the same time, which included four questions also loaded and asked very much in favor of the incumbent party. For instance, I can give you one example, which is: Are you in favor of admitting thousands of illegal immigrants from the Middle East and Africa in line with the forced relocation mechanism imposed by the European bureaucracy? So what we saw in these elections were that a lot of people were protesting the referendums by refusing the ballots, and this created a bit of unstable, I guess, administering of the elections in some cases. And what we've seen personally in our organization, what we have, I guess, has been most notable from our observations in 2019 and 2023 is the secrecy of the ballot, which has worried our observations a little bit. For instance, in 2023, we saw a group or family voting in 75% of our observed polling stations. But our organization have, of course, not now this election we're watching from the sidelines. So as a good organization, we rely a lot on the OSCE ODIHR reports instead. And from what I've gathered from browsing these, the legal framework has not been changed since it was changed in March of 2023. So these kinds of situations are, of course, not applicable this time. But just to speak a bit of our observations previously, from what we can see, the elections have transpired in an open and competitive manner. And the CECs have seemed to be well prepared for the election, but a bit of similarities from 2023 are seen, as you've also mentioned, the high polarization of the media and the rhetoric that has been used. So of course it's a different situation this time, but some similarities is possible to see.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. So now both candidates that are entering the second round of votes will have a lot of work ahead of them. And Caspar, you already mentioned that it's not directly possible to calculate the votes for the left and for the right and argue, well, this is the likely outcome of the second round of election. So please give us a bit more information on what you expect, what will happen in the next 2 weeks. Both candidates started campaigning immediately after the results came in on Sunday and carried on. So what will we expect, and what is your guess for the outcome in on June 1st?
Right. Of course, both candidates started courting the electorates of their the smaller candidates who didn't get into the second round. And well, you just used the expression left versus right. The important thing here, I believe, is that in fact we have two candidates that would, in many other European countries, be categorized as right, with Rafał Trzaskowski being a kind of center-right liberal candidate, and Karol Nawrocki being more explicitly towards the right with some nationalist undertones, but still, I would say, staying within the current European mainstream, so not to be categorized as far right for sure. Um, and since we have seen such a good result further to the right from Mensen and Brown, um, it seems strategically expectable for both candidates to try and gather at least some of that vote for themselves. And of course, that becomes very problematic for Trzaskowski, who, being, well, roughly in the center or right of center, um, is trying to at the same time attract the left wing vote and some elements of the right wing vote. This requires a lot of mental and political gymnastics, and he has been trying to do this. However, overall, it seems that the strategy for him is to underline the differences between himself and Nawrocki, meaning to highlight the liberal and the kind of left-leaning elements of his agenda. Because if he doesn't do that, he not only loses the chance to attract the left-wing vote, but he also loses a lot of credibility among his own, well, his centrist electorate. But so far, I mean, today Trzaskowski had a press conference where he suggested that he is going to kind of adopt a considerable part of the left candidates' agenda, including elements such as social housing, well, the discontinuation of what the government has been doing, or lack of support for what the government has been doing in terms of trying to solve the housing problem by making mortgages more affordable, which has been interpreted as basically the result of lobbying by real estate developers. And he was also underlining his kind of, well, cultural left affiliations, meaning that he is going to support the liberalization of abortion law, and he is going to support LGBT rights and, well, equality of marriage or civic partnerships. This, of course, makes him completely unacceptable for the electorate of the far right candidates. But what the polls regarding possible transfers between the candidates have shown, actually a lot of voters who cast their ballot for Mensen in the first round, they are not interested in either of the two candidates from the mainstream parties, the duopoly, as it's called in Poland. So this two-party system that has been in power since 2005 and doesn't really leave much space for anybody else. So many of the Mensen voters are likely not to show up for the second round or to cast an invalid ballot. And actually, some of them have also been considering switching to Trzaskowski. An important element that we should bear in mind is the question of mobilization. Trzaskowski, as the well, even though the presidency right now is in the hands of the Law and Justice, Andrzej Duda is a Law and Justice politician, um, Trzaskowski is interpreted as something of an incumbent candidate because he's affiliated with the current government, the government that won the election in October 2023. This means that his voters were not as mobilized as the voters of the opposition in this election. And in general, since whatever would have happened, the result of this election was kind of predictable and known. We knew that those two candidates are going to advance to the second round, and that neither of them is going to win a majority in the first round, and that probably the third challenger, Manson, is not going to be able to get into the second round. Many people could have just decided that, well, they will show up for the second round. They don't have to bother now. So this is an important factor because if that is the case, and if you actually count all the potential transfers between candidates, that the left-wing candidates are by and large, or their voters are by and large going to support Trzaskowski, whereas the far right are not so clearly in favor of Nawrocki. They're more likely to stay home. The current polling suggests that Trzaskowski could get up to 54% of the final vote. So he has something of an 8% advantage over Nawrocki, which is quite big because that is significantly above the kind of the statistical mistake threshold, and also visibly more than he had in the polls in the 2020 contest, where Trzaskowski was meeting Duda in the second round, and where Duda actually came in victorious with just a very narrow margin of 400,000 votes. So, all in all, if you want my prognosis, it seems that Trzaskowski still has a higher probability of winning, but it's not going to be an easy, well, week or slightly more than a week for him. There's a lot of work to be done, and the most important challenge, I think, for him is to actually explain to the voters why this is important. Because we have seen cohabitation between a law and justice president and a civic platform-led government for the past year and a half. And many people would argue, well, the world hasn't collapsed. Poland is still functioning. The government is, well, not doing much and is blaming the president, but in reality, they're also not doing much in general. That's the more and more often the feeling among the electorate. So why is this important? And so far, I think this kind of narrative for why those elections are so important has been lacking, and the Trzaskowski camp was not able to communicate that clearly.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we can also get back to the policy dimensions of this. Yeah, which candidate would make a difference and what could be a convincing narrative that the two of them should or will propose in the upcoming weeks in our Q&A. So Elisa, now getting back to procedures, you told us that obviously in the first round and also in the preparation of the election, we did not see that many challenges and struggles and problems. Of course, now the tone might get more rough or the competition more explicit between the two. So do you expect this also to have some implications for the procedures for the election? What about everything that is around elections, such as media observation, access to candidates, and so on and so forth? So what are you preparing for with your organization, or what do you expect in terms of the election procedures and the issues that you usually observe when you do an election observation in general?
Yeah, so thank you again for a good question. I think that one of the things that was very interesting with our previous election in 2023 was because of the so-called importance of the elections. We saw record turnout in many parts of the country, and especially in Warsaw, where my observation, no, my organization observed. And as a consequence, I guess, of that, was that there were a lot of voters coming to, I guess, a limited number of polling stations. So we did see, even though we didn't see any instances of very delayed voting, we did see some disorientation and queues in the polling station. So I am very interested to see now if the more, I guess, important round of the elections where more people might come out to play, as Caspar mentioned, that we will see kind of maybe the same types of effects, maybe the same types of turnout. And in those cases, I am interested to see if this will affect the secrecy of the ballot, as I touched on previously, because due to the large number of people who observed, no, who came to vote in 2023, some of the instances we observed, there was not much stringent use necessarily of the voting stations, and as I said, we saw instances of group voting and non-secret voting due to all highly motivated to come and vote, and people showed up in numbers, which was very nice to see, and hopefully that's something we see this year too. But of course, when the feeling of importance rises, then I guess also the stringency and the use of language may also change, sometimes also in a negative direction. So it's going to be interesting to see how this changes from the first round to the second, as you mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much for this assessment. So, of course, I would have some more questions on my agenda, but I would like to open up to our audience. And we said that the best way would be if you write your questions in the chat, so that there's no transmission problem, and then we can, or our two experts can answer them immediately. Maybe while people might think about a question, another short one for Caspar regarding the policy issues in the election. I mean, we saw a lot of talk about Ukraine. We also saw a lot of talk about, yeah, maybe not so much about EU politics as such, even though Poland has the EU Council presidency at the moment. But since you are an expert on climate governance, so maybe you can inform us a bit more about the debates on climate change, energy transition, and how this may have also played a role in Poland, in terms of, yeah, what the two most important presidential candidates stand for in terms of their energy, climate, economic policy.
This has been a pretty boring campaign, I must say, in the sense of not really being that much about policies. An important reason for this is that the role of the president in the Polish political system is not that strong and slightly ambiguous. So there is a bit of uncertainty in the constitution regarding what the competencies of the president actually are. And in times of cohabitation that we've already seen before, so during the last time when the civic platform back then, in the years 2007 to 2010, well, there was a period where before the Smolensk catastrophe, we had a law and justice president and a civic platform government. There was some controversy regarding what the president's competences are, especially in foreign policy. To what extent the president can be an autonomous agent and a policy entrepreneur, and to what extent this is pretty much a symbolic and formal role of the head of the state who is representing Poland abroad. So this is not resolved at the moment. Andrzej Duda, being a president heavily relying on the support of his political camp, has not really strengthened the presidency that much. So there is a limit to what the president can offer, and in this sense, there was also a limit to what programmatically the candidates were presenting and showing in their electoral campaign. Actually, Gazeta Wyborcza, one of the main Polish dailies, tried to reconstruct the programs of the two main candidates from their speeches and presentations from at meetings with their voters, and the results were very modest. They were not really able to find too many points, and even less points on which Nawrocki and Trzaskowski would differ. Of course, there were strong differences between them and the kind of the more minority challengers, people like Mensen or Zandberg, the candidate of the left, who had a very strong agenda of opposing the government's policies. And there, the question of, for instance, saying no to the migration pact, the EU migration pact, and also some kind of an opt-out from the European Green Deal have been quite prominent, but we've also heard that before. So Law and Justice in the 2015 campaign has promised an opt-out for Poland from EU's climate and energy policy, and of course that wasn't delivered because, frankly speaking, without even leaving the EU, this is just plainly impossible. Poland is too closely connected and too enmeshed in EU policy to be able to just leave it out for one way or the other. Ukraine has been a topic. Ukrainian migrants have been a topic for the far-right candidates, but Ukraine as such and the support for Ukraine has not really been an issue for Trzaskowski and Nawrocki. So their stance is pretty similar. They do voice support for Ukraine. Nawrocki, perhaps with some nationalistic undertones, criticizing Ukraine much more openly. So after President Zelensky's White House visit and the spectacle that we've seen in the Oval Office, Nawrocki was perhaps more openly critical of Zelensky, whereas Trzaskowski was on the side defending him from Trump. And in general, the attitude towards Trump is different. So Nawrocki was claiming some kind of a special relationship with Trump personally and with the US in general, and some kind of a possibility for a bilateral security engagement between Poland and the US. Trzaskowski and his camp, which is also the one where Minister of Foreign Affairs Sikorski is from, are turning from a traditional Atlanticist stance, where this partnership with US was always important, towards a strongly pro-EU position. So I would say that this would be the biggest difference in terms of their foreign policy, which is important for the president. So Trzaskowski is a person who most likely is going to support the EU's strategic autonomy, so this new concept that has been coined by Macron and promoted by France, but also others. Whereas Nawrocki is more of a traditional NATO first politician, even in light of what is going on in the US and how the US has been treating Ukraine and its European allies. On energy and climate, they differ, well, superficially, I would say. So Trzaskowski, as the mayor of Warsaw, has been a signatory of a pact of cities for climate policy, and he's a supporter of some green policies for sure. But on the other hand, his government has not been delivering that much in this area compared to the previous government too. Whereas Nawrocki is playing this kind of ritual game, trying to show to his electorate how distanced he is from EU climate and energy policy, but in reality, Law and Justice was doing roughly the same things. I mean, they were saying one thing and doing something else. So here, the difference is not really that pronounced. Overall, really, this election is going to be perhaps about the attitude towards the EU. So if the civic platform in Trzaskowski's camp can convincingly argue that Nawrocki is bad for the relationship between Poland and the EU, and also an important thing I would say is what internally would change if Nawrocki was president or if Trzaskowski was president. I think the biggest and most important difference, something that we have not mentioned here before, is the question of the judicial reforms that Law and Justice has introduced, and that the civic platform government since the end of 2023 has trying to reverse, but was not able to, largely due to the fact that the president is hostile towards any such changes. So if there was a president aligned with the current government, it is likely that the reform or the revival of rule of law in this more conventional sense, as the EU also understands it, would be possible, whereas in a situation of further cohabitation, it will not be possible, and it will lead to a prolonged chaos in the judicial system in Poland.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question that came in, and maybe both of you can answer that. So it's about the mobilization of younger people. And as you have mentioned, Kasper, indeed, Confederacja and their candidates, so they rather are supported by younger people, but their participation in elections is questionable. Why do you think this is the case, and what would that mean, and why do we observe this? It's also something that we saw, for example, in the last German election, that these parties are obviously attractive to parts of the young, very young generation. So is it just a social media phenomenon, or is there more to this? And maybe Elisa, you also have a take on that from, yeah, your collaboration, and since you are a student-led organization, so what's your take? Maybe you can start, Elisa, and tell us a bit more from your perspective, why right-wing parties seem to be attractive for at least parts of the young generation.
Yeah, so I think Caspar maybe has a better, well-rounded understanding than what I do, but I can attempt to answer this as well, of course. I mean, for us, especially in 2023 in Poland, we usually send teams of two out to observe, and we normally bring interpreters with us. And in this particular election, we had mainly student and young interpreters, which was really great for us because we could. So maybe we have a bit of a skewed understanding of youth participation in Poland, because the young students that participated in our observations as interpreters were extremely engaged, and they really cemented what we saw as the importance of the elections with their engagements and their willingness to spend I guess all of election day with us, from opening to closing procedures. But yeah, overall, speaking on the attractiveness of right parties for young people, I guess is a little bit outside of my scope as an election observer. So I think I will send it over to Casper.
Okay, then please take over.
Let me just share one slide, if I may. If you can see it, this is the exit poll results, so not the actual result, but the exit polls by age group, just to illustrate the differences between support for different candidates. But there needs to be well, we need two disclaimers here. So one, this doesn't take into account the difference in turnout, and the other, it doesn't take into account the size of those. I mean, the numbers of voters in those groups. So Poland, as most European countries, has a kind of an inverse pyramid demographic situation where there's more of older voters than younger voters. And as noted, younger voters are not so easy to mobilize. Actually, in this election, they were pretty mobilized, so they did show up in numbers. That was also the case in the 2023 election, where the participation of younger voters and the participation of women, so female voters, has influenced the results quite significantly. Yeah, so the important thing here, if you look at the youngest cohort, 18 to 29, there you see that those two explicitly right-wing and explicitly left-wing candidates are leading, so Menton and Zandberg, which doesn't happen in any other age cohort. Still, in the under 40 group, Menton has been winning, and this vote is strongly dragged by male voters. So now the question, why it is so that young and middle-aged male voters are so attracted to this agenda, it's very hard to answer. I don't really have a clear answer. This is beyond the scope of single sociological research project to answer. But as you noted, Claudia, this is similar to what we've seen in Germany and also similar to what we've seen in many other countries. So I think it's part of a general global trend where we see this split between male and female voters in terms of political views, where women are increasingly more liberal or left-leaning, and men are becoming radically more conservative and right-wing. And this is especially visible in the youngest cohorts, where the difference between the outlook and kind of the worldviews of men and women are becoming very divergent. This is worrying. This is probably a broader civilizational question, which I don't really have the knowledge to tackle. But we do see this in Poland for sure. So the agenda of Manson and Brown and Nawrocki to some extent is certainly anti-feminist. It is targeting a lot of the things that the feminist movement has been able to achieve in terms of establishing women's rights. And on the other hand, so you have the left, which is trying to preserve them, and the problem is in the center. So with Trzaskowski until almost today, not really being able to specify where his own position is. So we know, of course, from before that he is more liberal than what it seemed like from the electoral campaign to date. But whether this is going to be enough to mobilize young women and women in general to vote for him in the second round, which might be the factor that decides about his success, is very difficult to predict. One last thing that I would like to mention is the vote from abroad, because apart from my research on climate and energy, I've also been doing some research on how migrants vote, especially Central European migrants living in Western Europe. And there is this kind of, well, after every election in Poland, there's a lot of articles focusing on those, snapshot single results of elections in particular countries, and people asking and coming up with those ad hoc, common sense interpretations of the results. Like, for instance, in Norway, Brown and Manson had a tremendous success last Sunday. So I already read some comments online that this is because of, oil sector workers. Polish oil sector workers are super conservative. Of course, this makes no sense because, there's only a handful of Polish oil sector workers. And it doesn't explain why in 2023 parliamentary elections, Norway has been significantly more liberal and left than the homeland vote. So all in all, there's a lot of back and forth in the diaspora vote because the turnout is generally very low. But what is important is that in the 2020 elections, the presidential elections, as I noted, the difference between Duda and Trzaskowski in the second round was only around 420,000 votes, whereas over 430,000 votes were cast abroad. So, in principle and in theory, uh, like in Romania, the diaspora can influence the result of the presidential election, which would be very interesting because it would also be a very controversial thing if it occurred. So I'm really watching with interest, and I wonder how this is going to unfold.
Okay, thank you. Since I did not see another question in the chat, then I may direct your attention because now we talked a bit about the young male voters. What about the female voters? So in the 2023 parliamentary election, abortion was the very hot issue, and a lot of support for the now ruling coalition came from female voters. And as you also already explain, so to some extent, that there's no policy change also with abortion rights is due to the fact that the president vetoed a piece of legislation, but also the governing coalition itself does not have a common stance on how to handle or how to exactly reform the abortion rights after the change was brought to a very strict abortion regulation that makes abortion nearly impossible. Now, are the young women frustrated, disillusioned? Do you think this might be an issue that may pop up now in order to mobilize the young female voters or also the middle-aged female voters? What's your take on that?
Um, well, I don't want to engage in mansplaining here, but I mean, I think female voters who were very mobilized in the 2023 election, as you said, because especially of the abortion issue, but also in general, an anti-women climate that peace was able to create in Poland, that they have good reasons to be very disillusioned with the current governmental coalition. So it hasn't really delivered on any of the promises made before the October 2023 elections. And whatever Rafał Trzaskowski says and does in the coming week, this is going to be an important baggage for his campaign, which is very difficult to be dealt with. So this disillusionment is not going to go away so easily. On the other hand, one of the leading protest organizations in the women's movement in Poland, the Women's Strike Kobiet, has immediately endorsed Trzaskowski for the second round, saying that, well, whatever critique you might have against him and against the current ruling coalition, Nawrocki is just going to be so much worse. So for the leaders of this group, it wasn't an issue at all. And this is also the stance of the most of the left politicians who are basically adopting this kind of lesser evil perspective, saying that, well, we have many problems with Trzaskowski, who, as the mayor of Warsaw, has actually. I mean, so that's also a problem with Trzaskowski, which I haven't mentioned yet. But on the one hand, he is inheriting a lot of the negative associations from the ruling government, but also he is being dragged down by some of the policies that he's introduced in Warsaw as the mayor of Warsaw. And yeah, so those two things are not playing to his advantage. But on the other hand, like when push comes to shove, it is about the civic coalition and broader the so-called democratic opposition, which is now actually government, so name has stuck. Uh, and law and justice on the other hand. So right and non-right, I would say, because left is too specific a category here. So yeah, so all in all, I think that it's going to be difficult to mobilize women, but it is possible.
Okay, thank you for these insights. Elisa, now maybe in our last 5 minutes, we can broaden the scope a little. And um, there have been some reports about interference from foreign interests in the election in Poland, but we heard more of these discussions with other elections that took place in Europe in the last 1 or 2 years. So, to which extent does your organization also look into interference coming from other countries, trying to manipulate, trying to somehow, yeah, influence how the voting process and the decision making is going on? Um, so what do you observe in this respect? And do you see something that is relevant for Poland, or would you rather say that here this problem is maybe not so acute compared to some other countries in Europe?
Yeah, so Ada does mainly or exclusively actually short-term observations. So we are mainly focused on the events on election day when we observe ourselves. But part of our methodology as also educative organization is that we always go to the country. A few days before to meet with local actors, NGOs, international organizations, and embassies and other relevant actors, so that we can try and, I guess, grasp the political context in which the elections are happening. And as far as I can remember, it was not a major topic for us in 2023 when we were there and discussing the situation with the different organizations. But of course, we see that this seems to be an increasing problem, particularly in other countries in the region and in the world more widely.
Okay, and would you maybe like to insert some advertising block on your upcoming election observations, the next countries that you have on your list?
Yes, please, very much so. Ada is in a very exciting time because we are deploying more election observation missions than ever before last year and this year. So this year we already observed the elections in Kosovo in February, but we are very happy to announce that we will be observing two elections this autumn. So we will be observing in our home country, Norway, which will be very exciting, the 8th of September. In a little fun fact about ADA is that we're the only organization that observed the Norwegian elections during COVID. So we're going back for our second round this year, and also we're deploying a mission to Moldova to observe the September 28th election. So if anybody is interested, you can go to our website at Norway or email us at office@edanorway.no. Or follow our social media, because announcements and application links will be sent out in the next few weeks and months. So we're very excited about that. And perhaps we'll have the opportunity to come talk about our findings at a later date as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe a very last thing. So I think, Caspar, you already said you kind of expect Trzaskowski to win. Um, anything else that would be something you would like to present to us in terms of your expectations about the outcome of June 1 second round election?
Well, I just hope that the remainder of the campaign is not going to be too divisive in terms of the already mentioned language and how the Polish society is, which is already very polarized, how divided it is. So I do hope that the candidates are going to refrain from any additional dirty tricks and moves and things that are going to be leading to things that might just spin out of control. Because we have seen recently, I mean, also historically, there has been some violence related to the competition between the two ruling parties. One incident many years ago. Recently, there was as you probably have heard, a tragic incident at the University of Warsaw, which was also immediately interpreted and framed in political terms. Um, and I just do hope that the temperature is going to be kept at some manageable level. So yes, fingers crossed for that.
Okay, so then thank you so far to our two experts for your excellent contributions and for giving us really a very round picture on the content of the election, the competition, and also the procedures. And for our listeners and viewers, please follow up what Edda is doing on election observations. I don't know if you also need some more volunteers or people who would like to engage with your organization. And at least maybe on a positive note, we can conclude that also these elections in Poland receive a lot of attention from the voters' side. So this is a good thing for democracy that people are interested in using their voting rights. And as you said, Caspar, we hope that the remaining weeks and the next election Sunday in 2 weeks will be a peaceful day for democracy. And whatever the outcome is, that yeah, democracy will continue to function, even though we also highlighted the political differences and yeah, the outcomes that would also, of course, depend on who will be the next president of the Republic of Poland. Okay, so thank you to everybody for listening to us today. There will be more election talks in the format of Circle U Democracy Hub to come. So please follow up. We will advertise them. And now we wish you a wonderful afternoon and a nice rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.
You.